Hello everyone, welcome to the second mini lecture. This lecture is going to be focusing on childhood and adolescent development. So what I'm going to talk about in this lecture, I'm going to talk about two different groups of people that are at disadvantage in Australia and explain how their development is different to students without the disability or disadvantage. So I'm just going to get right into it. For the first one, I want to talk a bit about deaf culture. Now, what's really interesting is that deafness, people that identify as deaf, would actually call deafness a culture. It's not just a disability, it's also a culture. And in that culture, there are different social norms and different perspectives that you might not understand or realise. So some of the small things, for example, deaf students will grow up learning when you're watching an audience and someone does something and you're meant to clap, they don't clap like this. They do the silent applause where they put their hands up and go like that. There's also certain social rules in deaf culture that students that are deaf might grow up with. For example, in neurotypical culture, it's considered rude to, push someone to get their attention or wave in their face. But because people in deaf communities can't hear, it's completely acceptable to stomp your foot in front of someone to let them know that you're talking to them, or to tap them or wave a hand in front of their face so that they realise you're talking to them. And those sorts of things can create differences in how they develop and their social rules and what they're used to. For example, there's some research that shows that because deaf people or people that are hard of hearing, they may need a hearing aid or might not use a hearing aid at all, they might have less language development. So they might not have as many words or a sophisticated language in English. But in Auslan, they will be quite proficient. So another thing to consider is that students with deafness may be coming into the classroom as an English second language. One of the things to also consider is even the sense of humour is different. So it has been proven that there are jokes in the deaf culture that are passed down from generation to generation, where only the deaf people understand if the sign language and the culture specifically are known. So there are certain nuances in sign language that are passed down from culture, from generation to generation. And it has created their own sense of humour. So that's another way in which students might develop differently. Another sense of development that might be different is things like the use of English, where the syntax is different. So, for example, in English you would say, "What's your name?" But in Auslan you do the opposite. You do the sign for name, so it's your name, and then what is it? Instead of saying what is your name, you say name, what is it? Another nuance is the use of capital letters. When you see the word deaf written in all capital letters, it's actually not talking about the hearing impairment. It's talking about the culture of being deaf. So that's another difference. And deaf culture is actually protected by the United Nations as a specific culture. So that is something to understand, is that a lot of disabilities do come with their own culture. So even autism in Australia, there's been some research to show that there are specific patterns with um, people that have autism. People that have autism, for example, are more likely to marry someone else with autism. They're more likely to live in rural or country areas or in suburbs that have less noise. Um, and they're more likely to be communicating over technology. So over more likely to be communicating over platforms like Snapchat or Facebook as opposed to texting or ringing someone on their phone. Um, so what we have to understand is that disability can cause cultural differences that also leads to differences in the way they develop. So differences socially, differences academically, differences cognitively, in the way that they think might be different. Another source of difference, so moving away from disability, is students that are low SES, low socioeconomic. So students that experience poverty will have different stages of their development. Just trying to find it because I've not labelled it correctly. There it is. It was called the timeline. So in this timeline, it shows you that as students from poorer communities grow up, there are actually significant differences in their learning and in their abilities to acquire knowledge. So, for example, stress caused by poverty or family dysfunction, should be all family dysfunction, can cause developmental delays such as poor language skills or poor motor control. So they're more likely, students that are living in poverty are more likely to have difficulties playing sport. They're more likely to be uncoordinated, and they're more likely to have language difficulties. Stress related to poverty can also impact a child's working memory. So if they're stressed because they're not getting meals at home, that's going to impact the way that their brain develops. Students from low SES areas are also twice as likely to fall beneath the minimum standard by year 3. So that's also something that's very challenging. By the time you get to the middle years in school, so year 7, 8, students are at higher risk of disengagement. So students from poor areas are at a higher risk of dropping out of school altogether. However, there is evidence that in low SES areas, disengagement begins at an earlier age. So dropouts in low SES areas start at an earlier stage. Students from low SES families also enter high school with literacy skills that are 5 years behind those from high SES families. So in a high SES family, in a wealthy family, your family probably has more books, more technology. You probably have a parent that doesn't need to work full time, or you might have a parent that doesn't work at all and might be able to spend all their time with their children. So different disadvantages can cause an impact on a child's development. So firstly, it can impact a child's culture, and it can impact their social norms and what they consider to be normal. And secondly, it can impact them cognitively. It can impact their ability to read, impact their ability to write, impact their ability to count, because of various disadvantages. So this video, I hope, has kind of given you a bit of an introduction into how differences in development might impact different children. There's a video that I would like you to watch on the Moodle page about autism and how autism the different stages of development in autism impact a child's ability to learn, and then another video about ADHD. So I look forward to seeing you in the Zoom meeting, and I hope that this was helpful.